What does Donald Trump really mean when he says Chicago is about to find out why it's called the Department of War? Congressman Eric Burlison is correct that trust needs to be restored when it comes to UFOs and hearing whistleblower testimonies. Jared Isaacman has still not worked out that the entire Apollo program was a charade. The written statements from witnesses for the September 9 Congressional Hearing on UFOs have been posted online. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the week in review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to the September 13 edition of Exopolitics Today, the week in review. Today, later in the afternoon at 3 p.m., we are actually having a webinar. It's going to be one of the longer panel webinars where I will be first presenting, followed by a panel of experts, and then a Q&A. So some of the stories from the week in review I will be discussing at length in this webinar. So when that happens, I'll just give you a very brief overview of it and then refer you to the webinar to learn more. So this is where we get into the first story that I want to cover, which is a tweet from President Donald Trump when he says Chicago is about to find out why it's called the Department of War. So this was his truth post on his channel, and as you can see, it's a meme comparing him to the badass colonel in Apocalypse Now, and rather than fighting a war in Vietnam, it's a war involving a major city, Chicago. And so Chicago about to find out why it's called the Department of War. So very provocative meme there. And there is a lot of significance to this. And that significance is that we are seeing a war being played out on two levels. One is the war against illegal immigrants and street crime, and the drug cartels, and the other is the war against the deep state, the satanic underground networks in major cities such as Chicago. And that's something I will be discussing in more detail in today's webinar. So if you want to learn more about that, what's really going on in this war against the deep state satanic underground networks, then I recommend you attend the webinar later today. Here is a tweet from Congressman Eric Burlison where he's referring to the September 9 UFO hearing that did actually take place on September 9. And he's absolutely correct that trust needs to be restored when it comes to UFOs and hearing whistleblower testimonies. So, this has been, I think, the big step forward over in recent years, that whistleblowers are finally being taken seriously. Previously, whistleblowers were dismissed, even those that had excellent military credentials, that had worked for the military, had careers that spanned several decades. When they shared stories about UFOs, extraterrestrial life, they were routinely dismissed despite their long service history. That has changed. The current climate is now one where whistleblowers deserve to be heard and the evidence investigated or pursued. So the whistleblowers are now encouraged to come forward, to share their stories, and then members of Congress and investigatory bodies will try to find the supporting evidence for that. And so the Congressional UFO hearings are an opportunity for this process to play out, because members of Congress are taking that role, that whistleblower testimonies are worth hearing and investigating. Here is something concerning the UAP Disclosure Act. And at the time, back on September 6th, there was no pushback on the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026, which was called the UAP Disclosure Act, that was proposed, that was sponsored in the US Senate by Senator Chuck Schumer and also Mike Rounds and Kirsten Gillibrand. And a similar act was proposed in the House of Representatives by Congressman Eric Burlison and some others. And at this point, there had been no pushback. There was no sign that it was going to be included or not, that there was no opposition. But I will get to the latest news about that shortly. Okay, so here is another contactee perspective on the 3i Atlas that also claims it's a spacecraft that is playing a positive role in changing the frequencies of Earth and the solar system. So Lily Nova says it's a white hat operation involving the Earth Alliance and multiple ET species, and that corroborates other sources such as George Kavaslis, who has said something very similar. So here's Lily Nova's YouTube channel, 3i Atlas revealed, Galactic's monitoring, Trump meeting, Romanov revelation. But the 3i Atlas, what she had to say there from her sources, extraterrestrial sources, really did match what George Kavaslis had earlier said to me. So I will be talking about that more in today's webinar if you want to go further into that. Okay, so here's some humor for the week that was circulated. So this is involving Captain Picard and Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I'll play about the first minute and a half, so enjoy.
Hello, Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc, you're on mute.
Fucking mute button. Obi, it's so good to see you.
It has been too long, old friend.
To what do I owe this pleasure? Tell me, what are you up to these days? Still gallivanting around that galaxy of yours?
Something like that. Today I'm trying to track down a planet. I feel like I have barely any time to rest these days, Jean-Luc.
What's wrong, Obi? You look a bit stressed, a bit flat. Obi? When was the last time you got laid?
Jean-Luc, you can't be serious.
Oh, come on, Obi. You've got the robes, the beard. When was the last time someone polished that lightsaber of yours?
Jean-Luc, that isn't appropriate. I'm at the Jedi Archives.
That's precisely the problem, Obi. You're not going to find a girlfriend hanging out in a fucking library all day, are you?
I don't need to. I'll have you know, I already have a girlfriend.
Bullshit, Obi. What's her name? Go on, tell me. You can't, because she doesn't exist.
It's none of your business. Like you can talk, the Starfleet captain who's famous for being a slave to his job, barely any friends, no time.
I'll have you know, Obi, that I get plenty of tail here on the Enterprise.
Holodeck tail doesn't count, Jean-Luc.
Hey, it counts. Don't knock it till you've tried it.
Are you having a problem, Master Kenobi?
Oh.
Are you?
Okay, all right. So that is a little bit of humor, and you can watch the whole thing. It goes for about 3 minutes, and you go to the description below, and it'll have the links for you to watch and enjoy that little bit of humor. Here is an interview I did with Michelle Fielding, where she talks about the Ashtar command overlighting President Trump and Elon Musk in a worldwide military peace plan. And that's very interesting because I have been talking about Trump being part of a military initiative to rescue the American Republic from the plans of the deep state to essentially destroy America as a powerful nation in the world and have it replaced as the global hegemon by China. That was, in fact, the plan. And the plan called for America to be really debilitated in a series of wars that would culminate in a civil war, and then China would rise to global dominance. Well, Trump has been acting with the white hats in the military to overcome that. And so this is something that is pursued by the Ashtar command. They describe how they are helping Trump and Musk in this worldwide military peace plan. So very interesting to see both of them highlighted in this plan. So you can go to my website or go to the link in the description below to watch this interview, and very interesting how Trump is being overlighted by the Ashtar command, and that also complements what others have been saying, that his wife Melania Trump is actually working with the Pleiadians. So that's very interesting. Right, so here is an interview that Sean Ryan did with Isaacman, Jared Isaacman, that's right, Jared Isaacman, who was the initial Trump nominee to be the NASA director. Here he's talking about the let's say the $100 billion that have been spent to take humanity back to the moon. So let me play the first part of this interview for you. Let's hear what he has to say about the moon.
Why have we not been back to the moon? Why has man not been back to the moon since?
Well, I would tell you right from the get-go, I'm 100% in the camp. We absolutely went to the moon. And what a travesty that we haven't been back. And I can tell you how we got there. We had a great Cold War rivalry, our ideology versus theirs, and 4.5% of the federal budget and the will of the nation is what happened. And once we got there and we went a handful of times and collected enough moon rocks, that was an expense that was it was no longer palatable. I will say for 35 years, as taxpayers, we spent over $100 billion to return to the moon. 35 years later, we haven't been able to do it. That's obviously a big problem that we need to fix. There's probably a lot of underlying reasons associated with it, but
what would those reasons be?
Okay, well, there you have it. You have this explanation that over $100 billion was spent for missions to the moon, and that there were some missions that were conducted, some rocks were collected and brought back, but that is apparently the only time we have been able to go to the moon, and that in the last 35 years, humans have not been back to the moon. Actually, it's been 45 years since the last moon missions. I think it was 1973. So we're talking, that's 50 years. Wow, that's a long, long time. So what Jared Isaacman doesn't realize is that the entire Apollo program was a charade. Billions were funneled through the former Nazis running the Marshall Space Flight Center for the Fourth Reich secret space program using exotic propulsion systems such as anti-gravity. Meanwhile, the US got Saturn V rockets for a dog and pony show to the moon and back to justify the massive expenditure without the public learning the truth. So really, the Apollo program, and it needs to be emphasized, the Apollo program was run by German paperclip scientists. Just let that sink in. The German Nazis were in charge of the NASA Apollo program. So all the billions of dollars that were spent on that was funneled through the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Kennedy Space Flight Center, both of which were run by Nazis. Werner von Braun was in charge of the Marshall Space Flight Center, and Kurt Debus was in charge of the Kennedy Space Center. And so what was really happening was that all of that $100 billion in 1960s was actually being funneled through the NASA Apollo program. Only a small percentage of that actually went for building the Saturn V rockets for the trips to the moon. The majority of that actually was being funneled through to the German space program out of Antarctica. And because the German paperclip scientists were put in those positions of power because deals had been made with the Antarctic Germans whereby there would be technology exchanges and information shared so that the US military could develop its own secret space program using these exotic propulsion systems in their own secret bases and over the decades in Antarctica as well, because they got to develop the bases that the Germans initially found in Antarctica. So the whole Saturn V rocket program was really an elaborate charade to fool the public, because the vast majority of funds and that $100 billion, that was the appropriated money for NASA. What about the black budget funds that were being siphoned through the Marshall Space Flight Center to go on to the Germans in Antarctica? So essentially what happened was that the Germans were able to build fleets of exotically propelled spacecraft that could get them to Mars and to the outer planets and even to other solar systems. And the US would kind of like get the breadcrumbs from those programs in order to build their own secret space program that was called Solar Warden in the 1980s. That was run by the US Navy. And in the meantime, the civilian sector was kind of fooled by this charade to think that, well, the Saturn V rockets, I mean, that's it when it comes to space exploration. And it was just a massive lie. Okay, so here is a post or a link to the website where the Committee on Oversight was holding their hearing, Restoring Public Trust Through UAP Transparency. So at this website, you actually get the full video recording. It goes for about 3 hours of the UFO hearing. With there were 5 witnesses altogether, and their testimonies. You could hear them, or you could read the opening statements by Jeffrey Nucatelli, Chief Alexandra Wiggins, George Knapp, Dylan Borland, and Joe Spielberger. And so all 5 presented opening statements and then answered questions in that hearing. And I'll give you my summary. Well, here's my summary now. So the panelists did well in identifying the difficult circumstances whistleblowers have in sharing their UFO stories and evidence, and getting no real support by institutions such as the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO. AARO, in Arrow in particular was singled out as a failure due to it acting more as a counterintelligence operation to nullify whistleblower testimonies and their evidence. Also, the House of Representatives' failure to include the UAP Disclosure Act as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026 was also discussed as a mystery/disappointment despite its clear support from the UAP caucus that included panelists. So earlier in this week in review, I talked about there being no opposition at that time to the incorporation of the UAP Disclosure Act into the House version of the National Defense Authorization Act, that when the amendments for that House version were finally decided, the UAP Disclosure Act was not included. And this came as a big puzzle and mystery to Eric Burlison, who sponsored the House version of the UAP Disclosure Act, and he was really mystified as to why it was excluded. As far as actual evidence and testimony of the whistleblower panelists was concerned, new film footage provided along with eyewitness accounts of UFO sightings. This impressed some members of Congress who were previously skeptical, but really didn't break new ground when it came to more highly classified UFO material such as crash retrieval operations, non-human intelligence communications, corporate reverse engineering, etc. Those are the things that many people are very interested in hearing about because this was their interest was piqued by David Grush, who gave his testimony 2 years ago in July of 2023, where he talked about crash retrieval operations, NHI communications, corporate reverse engineering. But since him, there just hasn't been kind of like similar testimonies given about these topics. And instead, we've gone back to the old formula of kind of like UFO sightings with film of UFOs and people, let's just say, being impressed over the fact that these UFOs have been captured on military video, and that this is something that is not easily dismissed, but it really isn't very groundbreaking either. Now, this is where we get into something that I found really mystifying. So a member of Congress asked George Knapp whether he could estimate the size of the black budget used for UFO-related projects. Knapp said he didn't have a clue, which astounded me. The estimates can be found in the work of Catherine Austin Fitts, the former Housing and Urban Development Assistant Secretary, and Phil Schneider, a deceased/murdered civil engineer involved in the construction of deep underground military bases. Now, George Knapp would be familiar with those cases given his long history in the UFO field. Now, both of them, Austin Fitts and Schneider, estimated the black budget to be over $1 trillion at the end of the 1990s. In fact, Knapp interviewed me on Coast to Coast AM back in 2009 when we discussed my new exopolitics book at the time, which contained a large chapter on the black budget, where I presented all of the evidence for its estimated $1 trillion size. So why in the world would George Knapp say he has no idea? I mean, at least he can lay out the facts that, yes, estimates have been made by people like Catherine Fitts and Phil Schneider, and I laid out the information in my 2009 book, and he could say, well, I haven't been able to validate it, but at least he's got an idea. So that was very strange. Why would he do that? And then he said something else that, again, really surprised me. Knapp also proclaimed that while China and Russia have their best scientists and engineers working on UFO-related projects, this has not happened in the USA due to stigma. that is incorrect. I mean, I'm being kind there. I mean, it's bullshit. I mean, truly, I mean, the Americans have not devoted their best scientists and engineers to working on UFO-related projects. Of course they have. I mean, these have been the most highly secretive projects, even more highly classified than the hydrogen bomb. You can go to Wilbert Smith, the former senior official in the Canadian Department of Transportation, who wrote a report confirming that the flying saucer issue was very highly classified. The documented existence of secret space programs with fleets of exotically propelled spacecraft have been reverse engineered is evidence that major corporations such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman had been successfully working on such craft with their best scientists and engineers, so that there have been fleets of exotically propelled spacecraft built for secret space programs. There have been dozens, even hundreds of witnesses that have come forward to talk about them seeing or being involved in the building or actually having served on these exotically propelled spacecraft. Ben Rich, the former Skunkworks chief, has admitted as much in comments prior to his death, and Dr. Stephen Greer has done extraordinary work in identifying whistleblowers and documents that point to successful corporate reverse engineering. So, yes, why would someone like George Knapp, who has been doing this for decades, continue to hold this really discredited or this implausible idea that these advanced UFO technologies that have been recovered going all the way back to the 1940s, if not earlier, the 1930s, with the Italian crash, that none of those have been successfully reverse engineered? It really is mystifying why he continues to hold that viewpoint. In conclusion, the UAP House hearing will help legitimize further official disclosure on UAP secrecy and pave the way for future hearings, but was at best an incremental step forward in bringing about official disclosure. For veteran UFO exopolitics researchers, including you watching this, I'm sure many of you have been doing this for decades, the hearing failed to break significant new ground and was disappointing given the extensive whistleblower testimony that could have been called upon to discuss UFO crash retrievals, successful corporate reverse engineering, and so forth. Okay, so this is video that was sent to me by Lily Nova, who I've interviewed a couple of times on Exopolitics Today, and she was able to photograph some UFOs. Let me just mute that, and I'll talk over her video that she sent me. So she sent me this video, which is on her YouTube channel, where you get to see some of the UFOs that she has recently photographed. Now, Lily is a contactee, and she also does communications with ETs where she shares updates, but she has also taken photographs of the craft, and that's important because not all alleged contactees have photos of the craft that they're communicating with, and I think that's a very important indicator as to their credibility. If they have photos, if they have video, then I think that helps support their claims that yes, they're in contact, that they've been taken up on the craft, or that they are communicating with the ETs, and that they are sharing information. So these videos that she has taken, and this most recent one, show what appears to be a fleet of UFOs in the near Sedona, Arizona. And so that's very interesting because it's right there. There's these objects flying around, and yeah, they are by definition UFOs, and Lily claims that she can often communicate with the inhabitants of these UFO craft. So the whole thing goes for 6.5 minutes, where she discusses it. The link will be in the description if you want to learn more about that. So that's Lily Nova and her latest video of UFOs. Okay, so here is a article I did, or an exopolitics commentary I did on Trump's Department of War. So this is an article. It's a kind of fairly long article published on my website, exopolitics.org. And what I've started to do is that with these articles, I also do a video version where I will read out the article and also add extra commentary. And in this article, I really examine the creation of Trump's Department of War and how that, in my view, based on the evidence, and there's quite a bit of evidence here to be covered, suggests that really this Department of War is an effort to take on the global satanic networks that have been operating behind the scenes and controlling the US government, and controlling in particular these classified UFO programs that have been in existence. So it's a fairly long article, and also I plan to discuss it in depth in my webinar. And I won't go into it now because it takes us into topics, as you can see in Trump's left hand, will take us into topics that could give us a strike on YouTube. So yes, so definitely this is something I will go into more depth in my webinar today, and there's also the article for those that have not yet read it. Okay, so here is something that I found to be really very, very interesting. It's a message from the GFL Station, which has important exopolitical implications about the collapse of the deep state. So according to the Ashtar command, so earlier on I mentioned Michelle Fielding channeling Ashtar. Well, here you have another person, Dave Akira, saying he's also channeling Ashtar. And what he was told was that on September 4 at the White House, that there were these meetings involving high or big tech leaders such as Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman and a number of other big tech leaders involved in the development of AI, all discussing the future of AI development in the US and to maintain US leadership when it came to AI. Now, according to the information from the Ashtar Command / Akira, this meeting represented the big tech leaders defecting from the deep state agenda, that they had made deals with the Trump administration and made, in fact, the Trump administration is really just the kind of like let's just say the kind of cover, fig leaf for a group of high-level military white hats from the United States and around the world that asked Trump to run for the presidency and have been helping him from behind the scenes to deal with the deep state agenda, and that deals were made with these big tech tycoons, and that Melania Trump, who is in fact a Starseed, working with the Pleiadians, was also part of the meeting. She hosted the dinner portion of that event, and she's particularly interested in how AI is going to be used for educating children. So this is something that I will discuss again in this webinar later today, because this is a further sign that the deep state is collapsing, that we are in a historic moment in history, that the deep state that has been running our planet for centuries, and I'll be laying all this out in my webinar today, going all the way back to Sumerian times and the ancient gods, the extraterrestrial visitors, the ruling bloodline families. I'll be going through all of that to how the deep state has evolved, where it came from, what it's doing today, and how the deep state is now collapsing because of the actions taken by the white hats behind the Trump administration, working with the Earth, with their contemporaries from other countries in what is called an Earth Alliance. All right, so here is something that was very sad: the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the Republican activist that was going to university campuses to educate the youth about conservative values and issues. And there were elements in his assassination that rivaled what happened to John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and of course Charlie Kirk was also shot and killed at a public event, which was very sad. Now, I think all of these cases involve shooters. Often these shooters were depicted as lone gunmen, but you can make a very strong case, and many have, that these were more likely parts of that there was a conspiracy that was well coordinated, that you had mind-controlled patsies that were implicated in the shootings. And so this is where we get into the idea that this was orchestrated by the deep state rather than a rogue lone gunman. Now, I mean, that's still to be proved. I accept that. But what I think is very, very interesting is that Charlie Kirk's name, I mean, everyone is familiar with the Star Trek series, and of course Captain Kirk, and how that was a part of a Star Trek future. And the Star Trek future is something that is associated very much with the whole kind of UFO issue. And so in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, was it intended to send multiple messages? On the one hand, the deep state wanted to get rid of someone that was saying things that was very challenging to the deep state agenda, challenging to Israel, Mossad in particular, and also the challenge to this Star Trek future that the white hats want to create in collaboration with positive extraterrestrials. So again, this is something that I'll be discussing in the webinar. And here's an interview that was just done with Charles Hall, another former military serviceman. He worked for the U.S. Air Force. He was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in a place in a remote location called the Indian Springs. And he met a group of extraterrestrials that had built a base there in secret agreements with the U.S. Air Force. And he described in his Millennial Hospitality book series that these extraterrestrials that he called tall whites had helped the U.S. Air Force develop nuclear fission-powered anti-gravity craft in the 1960s that were capable of interplanetary flight, but not interstellar flight. So that tells us that over 60 years ago, that the US Air Force and, well, the US Air Force in particular were being helped by these tall white extraterrestrials to build these nuclear fission craft, and they had built them, and that Charles Hall was aware of these that were being built, and how the nuclear fission craft were dirty in terms of radioactivity when compared to the craft belonging to the tall whites that were capable of interstellar drive and used a different energy source to nuclear fission. So in short, Hall's testimony helps us understand the origins of secret space programs and that corporate reverse engineering programs were successful, which is contrary to what Bob Lazar experienced and what his supporters like George Knapp, I already mentioned, Jeremy Corbell and others continue to claim. Now, this is a very, the problem here is that Bob Lazar is accepted as being genuine, and I think he is genuine. I think he absolutely experienced everything he did. But what's not appreciated by people that have worked with Bob Lazar is that Lazar was actually part of a limited hangout. And that's difficult for people like Knapp and Corbell to accept because everyone likes to see themselves as being at the cutting edge, and no one wants to see themselves or be depicted as like putting forward a limited hangout. But I think that's exactly what happened to Bob Lazar, that he was allowed to go into these programs and to experience what he experienced and come out with the view that the attempts to reverse engineer the flying saucer craft were unsuccessful, whereas people like Charles Hall, who actually got to work with the extraterrestrials directly, they know that the craft was successfully built. Now, interestingly, this is an interview that has just come out. You can watch it at this link. This is Jesse Michael's website, YouTube channel, so you can watch it. You can watch it here. Where he describes the 3 years he spent with tall white aliens at Area 51. That is a kind of remote corner of Nellis Air Force Base. And back in 2004, I did several email exchanges with Hall, and they were published on my exopolitics.org site. I wasn't doing face-to-face interviews at that time. It was more like email interviews. And I collaborated in the investigation of his case with a New Zealand airline pilot, David Coots, and with a veteran UFO researcher, Paola Harris. So Hall, I think, is the real deal. He knows about these reverse engineering programs. He's seen the extraterrestrials. So I think he would be an excellent witness in a future UFO congressional hearing. Now, whether Tim Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna and Eric Burlison invite Charles Hall, that's going to be very interesting to see if that's what they do. All right, so now I want to finish off with some final comments about the webinar that's going to be held today at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or East Coast Time. So, Jazz, if you can put up that webinar banner, perfect. So I'll be starting off with a 90-minute presentation where I'll be presenting all the data on the collapse or Earth's liberation from the deep state and us joining the galactic community. So I'll lay out a lot of the history, go into much more detail into many topics, some of which I mentioned in this week in review. And then I'll be followed by a 90-minute panel with James Gilliland and Laura Eisenhower. James is an extraterrestrial contactee. He's taken hundreds and hundreds of photos and videos of UFOs. He's been communicating with extraterrestrials. He's well aware of the deep state, what it's been doing, and the transition that's happening at this point in our history. Laura Eisenhower has also been working for decades in researching the UFO issue. She was the subject of a recruitment effort to go to Mars, and she's also very familiar with the way in which the deep state operates and what's been really happening behind the scenes. So they'll be part of a panel session and for 90 minutes, and then we'll finish off with close to an hour of Q&A with the audience. So I think it's going to be a very exciting panel because we are truly at a transition point in our history, because the deep state is collapsing. I mean, we are at a point that it's very hard to appreciate the magnitude of what is happening right now, that a kind of like a network of global organizations that dabble in Satanism and are into kind of like big oil and big pharma and into big banking, that this organization, this network that has been pretty powerful and monolithic for decades, centuries really, even millennia, that could be on the verge of collapse, which it is. And why it's on the verge of collapse, again, I'll be explaining that in detail at the webinar. But this is a unique time in history, and you can be a part of it. And being a part of it means engaging with the information, digesting the information, understanding why the deep state is collapsing, and sharing that with friends and family and fellow workers and so forth. And so that's how we get the information out, and because this is a kind of information and consciousness and spiritual war, so we have to be aware of the issues. We have to dive deep into them, and so yeah, it's just an investment of time and resources, but it's going to be well worth it. So I hope you can join me and my fellow panelists, James and Laura, in this webinar later today. So thank you and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.